It's Monday, June 23rd, and it's 4:20 somewhere in the world. I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville. Produced and distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C., this is your NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome to the most popular podcast regarding marijuana in all of America and all the world, featuring interviews with scientists, politicians, doctors, prohibition policy activists, regular cannabis consumers, musicians, and NORML staff and NORML's board of directors, along with music and comedy no other podcast can offer. You can always find out more about our show at our website, stash.normal.org, and continue the education and conversation on our blog as well. We're ending marijuana prohibition with education, one listener at a time. The podcasting and blogging technology for the NORML Daily Audio Stash is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. For your professional web design needs, visit redaphid.com. Welcome to the Stash, everyone. I begin this show today with a little bit of a heavy heart in that my favorite comedian of all time passed away yesterday. George Carlin, the famous comedian, passed away at age 71 of heart failure. And, considering the cocaine abuse he went through in his life, 71 is a pretty good outcome. He used quite a lot of cocaine and had heart attacks and heart problems in the past. But of course, George Carlin will always be remembered by me and many others as maybe one of the greatest counterculture comedians that ever lived. Kind of picked up the mantle from Lenny Bruce, and had all sorts of marijuana references in his material. Of course, his album Toledo Window Box, of course, referred to a type of marijuana. And one of George's quotes, I remember he always said, "Doesn't make your breath stink, doesn't make you puke on your shoes," in reference to marijuana. So we'll all miss George Carlin, one of the top celebrities out there whoever spoke out against the war on drugs and spoke positively of marijuana. I have quite a lengthy clip of an interview with George Carlin that he did in 1982 with Playboy magazine, where he talks about his marijuana use. So check out our blog at stash.normal.org and check out the post on George Carlin, and you can read his opinions on marijuana that he used for over 30 years. And as a tribute to George, I'd like to play this little clip, of course, probably his most famous routine on the 7 words that you cannot say on television. And if you're offended by dirty language, you should probably skip ahead about 1 minute and 5 seconds in your playback right now.
There are some people that aren't into all the words. There are some people that would have you not use certain words. Yeah, there are 400,000 words in the English language, and there are 7 of them you can't say on television. What a ratio that is. 399,993 to 7. They must really be bad. They'd have to be outrageous to be separated from a group that large. All of you over here, you 7. Bad word. That's what they told us they were, remember? That's a bad word. No bad words, bad thoughts, bad intentions, and words. You know the 7, don't you, that you can't say on television? Shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits, huh?
I guess it's somewhat appropriate, since we've been talking about George Carlin, a native of New York City, that today's interview takes us to New York City. We'll be talking with Dr. Harry Levine, who's a professor of sociology at Queens College in New York. And this April, he was the co-author of a study called Marijuana Arrest Crusade, Racial Bias in Police Policy in New York City from 1997 to 2007. A report that found that New York City is the world's leader in marijuana arrests, with about 100 marijuana arrests per day. And Dr. Levine's data show how a lot of these arrests are racially motivated and incredibly biased against both African Americans and Latinos, particularly young men in the city of New York. Also, we've got your regular hemp headlines coming up, and as we're getting here to the end of June, it's time for our Pass the Stash contest. This time you could win a copy of Pot Culture, the A to Z Guide to Stoner Language and Life, the fantastic pot encyclopedia book by Steve Bloom, who's a regular guest here on the show, and Shirley Halperin. Tell you everything you ever wanted to know about marijuana and maybe a couple things you didn't. So stay tuned for later on in the show. We'll give you the instructions on how you can play Pass the Stash and win a free copy of the book. Also, we've got a great musical break here from a cousin of Johnny Knoxville, the Jackass star. This is Roger Allen Wade, who will be joining us here for our blues break on this fabulous Monday. So everyone sit back and relax and get yourself a little Toledo window box and enjoy your NORML Daily Audio Stash. Now it's time to take a look at the latest stories about marijuana from news organizations across America and around the world in our NORML Daily Audio Stash, Hemp Headlines. Marijuana's rising potency sparks debate from the Boston Globe. Now, this story is just another retelling of the potency debate that's going on since the drug czar has been trying to push the pot 2.0, this ain't your father's Woodstock weed propaganda. But there was a part in this article that I thought was interesting that I wanted to respond to. In a field with limited research, partisans tend to create paper-thin arguments as easily made as they are countered, said Roger Rothman, professor of sociology at the University of Washington. I think both sides do a disservice to the general public, said Rothman, who has written papers and edited books on marijuana use and dependence. On websites of drug policy reform activists, quote, you'll find lots of information about the very adverse consequences of criminalizing marijuana and very little mention of the very real harm associated with marijuana among some people in some circumstances, end quote. Meanwhile, on government and prohibitionist websites, he said, quote, you'll find plenty of information on the harmful consequences of marijuana abuse and very little information, perhaps, on the harmful consequences of criminalizing marijuana, end quote. Wow, that almost sounds like a dare. Okay, Professor Rothman, you want us to present the very real harms of marijuana? Here goes. According to the Institute of Medicine's 1999 report, Marijuana and Medicine, Assessing the Science Base, 9% of the people who ever use marijuana become clinically dependent. That compares to 15% for alcohol and 32% for tobacco, legal drugs where the users can choose to take that risk, or 17% for cocaine and 23% for heroin, which of course are illegal drugs where we forbid people from taking that risk. So for all four of those drugs, alcohol, tobacco, cocaine, and heroin, we find a much higher chance of becoming clinically dependent than the 9% who become dependent upon marijuana. But even for those who do become dependent, the report concludes that, quote, a distinctive marijuana withdrawal syndrome has been identified, but it is mild and short-lived. The syndrome includes restlessness, irritability, mild agitation, insomnia, sleep EEG disturbances, nausea, and cramping, end quote. Now, compare that to the withdrawal symptoms associated with alcohol, tobacco, cocaine, and heroin, in which pain, shock, craving, nausea, sweats, hallucination, and even death can occur. In fact, according to Dr. Jackie Henningfield, working for the National Institutes on Drug Abuse, aside from its intoxicating nature, marijuana ranks around caffeine in addictive qualities. Now, among the adolescents, or those predisposed to mental illness, heavy use of marijuana could be a factor in developing mental illness. But among that same set, you'll find alcohol causes much more serious harm. Now, Professor Rothman may be right when he suggests too many pro-marijuana sites do not highlight the potential dangers. Part of the reason for that may be that when society seems to have no problem with the actual dangers of alcohol and tobacco, which are far worse than anything suggested, much less proven about cannabis, we see no need to highlight the dangers of the far safer cannabis. But let it never be said that NORML has suggested cannabis is harmless. It isn't. Inhaling burning vegetable matter is a risk. Adding THC or any drug to your bloodstream is never perfectly safe. But when more people have died being shot over marijuana than smoking it, And when more people are arrested for possession of marijuana than turn themselves in voluntarily for treatment to stop smoking it, you can bet we're going to highlight the prohibitionary harms of marijuana more than the slight physical or psychological risks. Medical pot ineffective as acute pain treatment. From the Washington Post. Oral cannabis, a form of medical marijuana, was ineffective in treating certain types of acute pain and actually increased sensitivity to some other kinds of discomfort, say researchers at the Medical University of Vienna in Austria. Their study included 18 healthy women who were given oral cannabis or a placebo. The women were then evaluated for heat and electrical pain thresholds in skin areas that had induced sunburn. This is an accepted method of assessing response to acute pain. The study's author, Dr. Birgit Kraft, said in a prepared statement, quote, "The surprising result of our study was the absence of any kind of analgesic activity of THC standardized cannabis extract on experimentally induced pain using well-established human model procedures. Our results also seem to support the impression that high doses of cannabinoids may even cause increased sensitivity in certain pain conditions." End quote. The study is published in the July issue of the journal Anesthesiology. Well, pain is a strange thing. There are many types of pain, and it seems that THC is effective for some and not for others. For example, we're finding great results in the use of cannabis to treat neuropathic or nerve pain, which is very resistant to treatment with conventional analgesics like opioids. We've also found that there is a Goldilocks dose when it comes to treating pain with cannabis, where low potency 2% THC marijuana didn't help, and high potency 8% THC marijuana made it worse, but moderate potency 4% THC was just right and helped to ease certain types of pain. Or we could just ask the tens of thousands of medical marijuana patients in America's 12 free states who list chronic pain as their qualifying condition whether cannabis is working for their pain. Weeds cast smokes fake marijuana. From Hollyscoop.com. Actress Elizabeth Perkins, who stars in Showtime's hit TV show Weeds, insists that the cast only smoke fake marijuana, but when asked about the real stuff, she's all for it. Perkins says the producers of the show supply them with fake weed that doesn't actually get you stoned. She says, quote, "It's a combination of herbs that don't get you stoned. If we smoked real weed, we wouldn't get anything done over here." End quote. But Perkins insists the real drug is harmless. She added, quote, "I think it is crazy that it is illegal, and I think it is crazy that people are in jail once they get busted with small amounts of marijuana. I just don't see it as that dangerous of a narcotic." End quote. Well, yeah, Elizabeth, but if it wasn't illegal, you wouldn't have a job on the stoniest show in cable. Yeah, you're right. I'd be willing to give up the TV show, too, if we just had legal marijuana. One big drug test. Analyzing a city's sewage can put a number on its vices. Reminds me of George Carlin. George Carlin used to ask, "Raw sewage? Is anyone actually cooking the stuff?" From the Los Angeles Times. Environmental scientists are beginning to use an unsavory new tool, raw sewage, to paint an accurate portrait of drug abuse in communities. Like one big citywide urinalysis, tests at municipal sewage plants in many areas of the United States and Europe, including Los Angeles County, have detected illicit drugs such as cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, and marijuana. Law enforcement officials have long sought a way to come up with reliable and verifiable calculations of narcotics use to identify new trends and formulate policies. Surveys, the backbone of drug use estimates, are only as reliable as the people who answer them. But sewage does not lie. Since people excrete chemicals in urine and flush it down toilets, measuring raw sewage for street drugs can provide quick, fairly precise snapshots of drug use in communities, even on a particular day. The results have been intriguing. Methamphetamine levels in sewage are much higher in Las Vegas than in Omaha and Oklahoma City. Los Angeles County has more cocaine in its sewage than several major European cities, and Londoners apparently are heavier users of heroin than people in cities in Italy and Switzerland. Cocaine use peaked on Saturdays, while heroin and marijuana use remained steady week-long. For now, this new drug test remains anonymous. Wastewater from thousands, sometimes millions of people, is pooled at treatment plants, so it cannot be tracked to any individual or specific location. But because waste also can be tested in local sewers, questions about privacy have been raised. Christian Doughton, Chief of Environmental Chemistry at the EPA's National Exposure Research Laboratory, said, quote, "You could take this down to a community, a street, even a house. You can do all kinds of stuff with this. It's sort of unlimited," end quote. And if I understand the law, you have no privacy rights when it comes to your waste. Once you set your garbage out by the curb, anyone can look through it without a warrant. I would imagine the same rules apply once you flush the toilet. Imagine the potential for abuse. The sewage of residents in public housing could be monitored for drug levels, and housing could be revoked for a positive test. Neighborhoods with higher drug levels in sewage could be targeted for more aggressive policing. Imagine then the backlash. People refusing to urinate in their homes and instead using the street or the yard. People not using their own bathrooms but instead waiting for public restrooms at work or while they're out shopping. As we've suffered through a couple decades now of workplace urine testing, I often joked about how gross it was to be asked to produce your bodily fluids in order to get a job. I wondered how prevalent drug testing would be if instead of urine, you were forced to produce a stool sample. Now it looks like we'll all be providing such samples, without knowing it, just by using the bathroom.
Hello, I'm Paul Stanford from the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation, or THCF. Medical marijuana is legal in 12 states today, and THCF has medical clinics in 6 of those states. Our physicians help qualified patients obtain an authorization for medical marijuana in their state. Patients are eligible for medical marijuana with a history of either severe chronic pain and or nausea, cancer, AIDS or HIV, hepatitis, glaucoma, seizure disorders like epilepsy, chronic muscle spasms as in multiple sclerosis or asthma, neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, and gastrointestinal disorders like IBS or Crohn's disease. If you or someone you know has one of these conditions, our doctors will help them obtain a permit for medical marijuana. THCF Medical Clinics has offices in Washington State, Oregon, Colorado, Nevada, Hawaii, and California. Call 1-800-723-0188 or go to the web at www.hemp.org or 1-800-723-0188.
Well, a very important study came through in April, and this was a study on marijuana arrests. The study is called Marijuana Arrest Crusade, Racial Bias and Police Policy in New York City, 1997 through 2007. And we're very happy to have one of the authors of the study, Dr. Harry Levine, a professor of sociology from Queens College, part of the City University of New York. He's one of the co-authors of the study, and welcome to the Daily Audio Stash, Doctor.
Thank you very much.
So this is a study of a decade's worth of marijuana arrests, 1997 to 2007, so the most recent arrests that you've gotten. And what is the major find that you've come up with in this study?
Well, there's several of them. The New York Police Department, since 1997, has been engaged in making massive numbers of arrests of people for possessing, simply for carrying around in their pocket, very small amounts of marijuana, generally less than 7/8 of an ounce, and often a joint or a blunt or a nickel bag or dime bag, a tiny amount of marijuana. About 52% of the people arrested are black. Mm-hmm. About 31% of them are Latino. Less than 15% are whites. The 90% of them are male, and the majority are under 26 years of age, down to 16 years of age. The people arrested are held overnight, generally for at least 24 hours in the city's pretty deplorable jails. They are not, and this is really important to emphasize, they are not smoking in public. The vast majority of them. A few are. But the vast majority of people, somewhere between 2/3 to 3/4 of the people arrested, were simply walking around someplace or had marijuana buried deep in a pocket or in their possessions, backpack of some kind. The police found these people by stopping and frisking them. New York City made 500,000 stop and frisks in 2006. And in the course of the frisk, they searched people, sometimes legally or by tricking them or intimidating them into revealing what they have. And the NYPD has had a long-term practice of obtaining evidence from people through such trickery. Police are allowed to lie to people, and so what they will customarily say to someone is, "We're going to have to search you," even though they're not legally allowed to do that, unless they really believe somebody has a weapon. We're going to have to search you, and in that case, they can only do a pat down. We're going to have to search you, they will say. And if we find anything you're not supposed to have or anything illegal, then it's going to be a whole big deal. We're going to have to bring you back to the station. You're going to be held for 24 hours. But if you take out and show us what you have, then maybe it's no big deal, and maybe we can just write you a ticket, or if you have a little bit of marijuana, maybe we can just let you go. So if you've got anything you're not supposed to have, they will say, take it out and show it to us now. And at that point, most people, especially young people, will take out what they have and hold it open, hold it in front of the police officer. At that point, they are now violating New York State criminal law 221.10, and they are at that point handcuffed, arrested, and taken into custody, where, as I said, they're held for 24 hours or so.
So is this the trick that they use to get around New York's decriminalization?
That's exactly right. Since 1997, the possession of 7/8 of an ounce or less of marijuana has been decriminalized in the state of New York, meaning it is not a crime. It is a violation, like a traffic violation, like, say, rolling through a stop sign or something, and can produce a $100 fine. But none of these people over between 1997 to 2007, New York arrested nearly 400,000 people for possessing small amounts of marijuana. This is more arrests for marijuana than any city in the world, and at a higher per capita rate than almost anywhere. There's a couple places, large cities that are not as large as New York, that arrest people at a very high rate as well, but New York's so large that we actually here in New York can arrest more people for possessing marijuana than any place in the world. And yes, marijuana has been decriminalized, so the police get around. It really begins in 96 and 97 with Rudolph Giuliani, but it has continued unabated, unrelentingly to this very day.
You know, that was something I was thinking about, too, is how this would be related to, I remember back in the 90s, Rudolph Giuliani had his quest to do more community policing. It was that broken windows theory that if they cleaned up the graffiti and took care of the little crimes, then the big crimes would go away. And, you know, to some extent that happened in New York City. But you're saying this began in the Giuliani administration, but the subsequent administrations haven't done anything to stop it.
It has embraced it wholeheartedly. The arrests under Bloomberg are now, Bloomberg for 2007, the last year, the arrest data for 2007 finally came out in sort of around early 2008. For 2007, New York arrested another 39,700 people for possessing marijuana, and Bloomberg's total arrests now exceed Giuliani's for this. So yes, this has been fully embraced by 2 New York mayors, several police commissioners, and carried on daily. New York arrests about 100 people a day. 83% of them young Black and Latinos.
So a lot of people, you know, I shouldn't say a lot of people, but critics of this type of research will come out and they'll say, well, you know, it's natural that you're going to have, you know, more minorities arrested for these things because there's more crime going on in the poor minority neighborhoods. What would you say to that?
Thank you. I apologize for having neglected to mention one other really important point here, which is that every national survey study of drug use, the United States Household Survey done yearly or the high school survey, finds that whites use marijuana at higher rates than do blacks or than do Latinos. Young whites use marijuana more than blacks and Latinos. So in New York City, we have more whites than blacks and more whites than Latinos, and yet every day far more blacks and Latinos are arrested than whites. This is the result of police practices about where police are deployed and who they are sent out to look for. We do not think that the extreme racial bias in these arrests are the result of, sort of racism on the part of individual officers. Of course, there are some cops who are racist in some way, or find it more attractive to arrest blacks and Latinos than whites. But by and large, that's not what's going on here. The police department itself, this is ordered from the highest level of the police department. Individual officers don't take it on themselves to make nearly 400,000 marijuana arrests because they just feel like it. This is ordered from the top levels of the police department, and patrol cops and narcotics police are sent overwhelmingly and heavily to only certain neighborhoods, by and large what are sometimes designated high crime neighborhoods, which in New York, as in almost every major city in the United States, are disproportionately black and Latino. And they're looking for suspects. They have quotas to fill. They have to give so many tickets. They have to make so many stop and frisks. They have to make so many arrests. Although police departments deny it, quotas are a taken for granted fact of everyday policing in every place in America. And so they stop people where they are. And by and large, they're stopping men. 90% of the arrests are men, and the vast majority of stop and frisks are men. And they're searching them in the way that we explained, or tricking them into taking it out. And so they're looking for an arrest of any kind whatsoever that they can make, because the cops get rewarded for bringing people in. They get arrest stats, and everybody sort of counts that kind of stuff. And if an officer makes an arrest toward the end of a shift, he can get 3 or 4 hours of overtime. So there's a great incentive on the police to make arrests for anything, and they're hunting, quite literally, in only certain neighborhoods, looking for certain kinds of suspects. Now, the other thing is that even in white neighborhoods, or outside of sort of poor and Latino neighborhoods, blacks are arrested at many times the rate of whites. In New York, these marijuana arrests, Latinos are arrested at nearly 3 times the rate of whites, and blacks are arrested at 5 times the rate of whites.
Wow.
I smoke lots of weed, man. I plant that big old seed, man. I smoke every strain there is in town. From the super sticky green to the headache mixed brown. I smoked every strain there is around.
I know that I like it. I know that lots of people like it. So let's see what happens if you overdo it.
Do we have any pot smokers here today? Any at all?
My name is Doug Benson, and I'm about to get super high.
The term medical marijuana, you've basically, you drank the Kool-Aid. Because there is no such thing as medical marijuana.
I'm going to smoke pot every day for 30 days. And try to remember to film it.
And my movie's going to be called Super High Me.
Or Business as Usual. I haven't decided yet on the title.
I'm going to be hospitalized, I think.
Some people call it dope. Some think it smells like burning rope. I tell you, it relieves my mind.
Here at the Normal Daily Audio Stash, we work hard to change our nation's marijuana laws through education and discussion. But we also take time to relax and unwind with an eclectic mix of pod-safe music from many independent artists. We look for music that speaks to the growing truth about cannabis, or music that speaks to broader themes of freedom, liberty, social justice, equality, and protest. To find out more about the artists and download the music you hear on this podcast, just log on to stash.normal.org. And if you'd like to get your music heard by the online cannabis community, just send us an email at stash@normal.org. We hear all kinds of blues on the Blue Monday Stash. Today we visit some countrified blues with Roger Allen Wade and a great Stash song called Stoned Traveler. Roger Allen Wade is well known for having a famous cousin, Johnny Knoxville, and his album is on Knoxville's record label. Who knew Johnny Knoxville took time away from his groin-punishing antics to run a record label company? Well, all jackass references aside, Roger's music sells itself. He has written music for many of country music's greats, and he wrote the #1 country hit, Country State of Mind, that was recorded by Hank Williams Jr. This is a stripped-down sound with a great folksy arrangement, and Wade's voice fits well into his laid-back country genre. Wade calls Chattanooga, Tennessee home. Whether you're a stoned traveler this summer or, due to gas prices, you take a staycation, may all your travels be happy. You can check out more about Roger Allen Wade by visiting our website at stash.normal.org, where you can get a download of the MP3 for this song. It's Roger Allen Wade with Stoned Traveler.
I'm a stone traveler, got no place in this world to call my home. I am a stone traveler, got no place in this world to call my home. But there's a mansion that is mine at the end of that line between them numbers on his stone. I walked that lonesome valley like any rambling man. Lord, I walked that lonesome valley like any rambling man. Boy, I get to where I'm going and get back the best way that I can. I'm a stone traveler, got no place in this world to call my home. I am a stone traveler, got no place in this world to call my home. But there's a mansion that is mine at the end of that line between them numbers on his stone. Lord, I talk to God Almighty more than I talk to anybody else. But there's a thin line between praying and a crazy man just talking to himself. I am a stone traveler, got no place in this world to call my home. Stone traveler, got no place in this world to call my home. But there's a mansion that is mine at the end of that line between them numbers on his stone. Lord, there's a mansion that is mine at the end of that line between them numbers on my gravestone.
It's time to play Pass the Stash, where you can win cool prizes from NORML.
All right, folks, time for our June Pass the Stash contest. Yeah, with only 1 week left to go, I know. I got a little busy. The prize this month is a copy of Steve Bloom's new book, Pot Culture, the A to Z Guide to Stoner Language and Life. And all you have to do to win is pass our special drug test. Now, don't worry, we don't want your pee. We just want your correct answer on the following 3 multiple-choice questions. Question number 1. Which of the following 4 stoner movies made the most money at the box office? Was it A, Half-Baked with Dave Chappelle, B, The Big Lebowski with Jeff Bridges as the dude, C, Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, the first Harold and Kumar movie, or D, Tenacious D and the Pick of Destiny with Jack Black? Question number 2. How many people were arrested for simple marijuana possession in 2006? Is it A, about 1.9 million, B, about 830,000, C, about 740,000, or D, about 610,000? And question number 3, according to the Institutes of Medicine, what percentage of cannabis users eventually become clinically dependent on cannabis? Is it A, about 31%, B, about 15%, C, about 9%, or D, it's a trick question because nobody becomes clinically dependent on marijuana? Send your answers along with your name to our email at stash@normal.org. You can remain anonymous if you wish, just say so. The first email to hit my inbox with all 3 correct answers wins the Pot Culture book. Remember, the 3 questions are, which of the following 4 stoner movies made the most money at the box office? How many people were arrested for simple marijuana possession in 2006? And according to the Institutes of Medicine, what percentage of cannabis users eventually become clinically dependent on cannabis? Check out our blog at stash.normal.org. You can see all the questions and the possible answers right there in the blog. And again, first email to make it to my inbox with all 3 correct answers wins the Pot Culture book. We continue now with part 2 of our interview with Dr. Harry Levine from Queens College on the marijuana arrest crusade, the racial bias and police policy in marijuana arrests from 1997 through 2007 in New York City. That's just amazing. Now, did your research look beyond, the arrest to the consequences of the arrest? Did you find blacks and Latinos getting convicted more often, sentenced longer, anything like that, or was this just purely on the arrest statistics?
There are others who have focused on the sort of the conviction question, but in this case too, at every step along the way, blacks are arrested more, they wind up convicted more, they wind up with harsher sentences when they get them. But the thing about the marijuana arrests, and this is tricky to a lot of people, is that other than the 24 hours in custody, and again, I repeat, that's very often a degrading and humiliating experience, there generally isn't a whole lot beyond that. Typically, people will get, for a first offense and sometimes a second arrest, what in New York parlance is called an adjournment in contemplation of dismissal, and what's called an ACD in the jargon of the New York courts, which is essentially a form of probation. Okay. Meaning if somebody isn't arrested again for a year, then the charges will be dropped. However, the arrest record remains forever. Anytime they ever have any criminal justice issues, this thing is there. It can be found by employers who can easily hire a cop or somebody, brother-in-law or somebody to check the record. So in our day and age, this can often turn up in the arrest, even can turn up in employment records, which can severely limit people. And what we suggest in the report is that these arrests are best thought of as a kind of Head Start for prison program. The United States in the 1960s created the Head Start for preschool program, where children from poor neighborhoods were brought in to Head Start programs to help prepare them and socialize them for the demands and expectations of the school system. And this Head Start for school system program has worked quite well for all these many years. Well, this is a kind of parallel program, and a Head Start for prison program, in which police are sent out to black and Latino neighborhoods, and they bring in young blacks and Latinos, nearly 35% of which have never been arrested before, and 60% have never been convicted of anything, and 75% have never even been convicted of anything other than a misdemeanor. And they all get in kind of socialized into what an arrest looks like, what a booking looks like, what the holding cells look like. They get 24 hours in the system. They go through the courts. They in the jails they see other black and brown young men like themselves. They come out with a kind of grown up story to tell. Again, these are almost overwhelmingly teenagers and young adults. To their relatives, friends, neighbors about what they've been through, and then they get tips about how to handle themselves. These arrests can limit their schooling opportunities and their job opportunities. Somebody might not refuse to hire somebody or accept somebody to school because of a marijuana arrest, but nobody is helped by having one of these things, and they can clearly hurt sometimes. And so they limit opportunities. People are limited in the neighborhoods and where they could do. There often isn't that much going around, and the cops are out there looking for people to bust again. So the chances are that these things will then mount up, and they can count against future offenses. So yes, I think there's a long-term consequence of these marijuana arrests and of other kinds of misdemeanor arrests that function, as we say, as a head start for kind of prison program.
You know, a lot of our listeners on the stash here are going to be, behind us all the way. Sometimes it's like preaching to the choir. So I often like to try to phrase these things in ways that, there's a lot of people in New York City that don't smoke marijuana, have never smoked marijuana, don't know anyone who smokes marijuana. So how is this affecting them? How is this hurting them in terms of costs or lost police time?
Well, if you think about 400,000 arrests over the course of 11 years, that averages out to about 36,000 arrests a year. That averages out to 100 a day, day in and day out for 11 years. You think of the police activity spent looking for these people, stopping and searching people and then taking them into custody. And each arrest can take 3 or 4 hours of police time in processing, fingerprinting, photographing them. And then generally the arresting officers will then bring them down to the central booking holding cells in another part of the city where they're held overnight. That's a whole lot of time in which police are either off the streets or engaged in something which is not related in the slightest bit to serious crime fighting. And you could think about what those police could be doing instead of this. And it's always been, it was a central, the costliness and the diversion of police into pointless activities was central to the New York State legislators' arguments for and justifications for and motivations for the 1977 decriminalization bill. It is sort of central to all sort of cases for the decriminalization, for why this is a waste of police resources. Nobody knows, and that information is impossible to get without subpoenaing the police department or somebody getting inside of their system, and nobody's even seriously tried to do that. There's been no resources devoted to it because nobody knows these, until we released our report, nobody knows these things have been going on. Mm-hmm. Police don't talk about it, and the media hasn't covered it. But nonetheless, we drew upon studies from other places and estimate that that using pretty good figures out of the state of Washington and some other places, that you can figure that one of these arrests cost in New York City somewhere between about $1,500 and $2,500 in police time, in transportation costs, in the jail costs, and in the court costs, which are quite substantial. They constitute marijuana arrests. I mean, it seems hard to believe, constitute 10%, over 10% of all the arrests in New York City. And they constitute an even larger percentage of the many misdemeanors. So this is not an inconsequential activity. And if you add up all those costs, you get a range of something like $50 million to $90 million a year. Or these arrests, of course, somewhere between $500 million to approaching $1 billion for New York City to arrest and incarcerate overnight all of these people and to run them through the court system and so on. So, this is an expensive, wasteful, and repressive activity.
You had mentioned a couple of figures about the people that are being popped here for these marijuana arrests, not really having any prior record or misdemeanors. But I can just imagine somebody who's not well informed on this subject might think that, if we catch them for marijuana and that gets them in the database and we know who they are and they're associated with other crimes, won't this help in trying to combat other crimes because of the association between illegal drugs and crime? What's the debunk on that one?
Well, first of all, almost everybody, one of the remarkable things about marijuana is that almost everybody in America knows somebody who smokes marijuana or has smoked marijuana and knows that they don't become criminals. that this drug is remarkably unassociated with criminal activity of any sort whatsoever. I mean, we had, former presidents, congressmen, at least one Supreme Court judge, and the current mayor of New York City, all of whom have smoked marijuana. And when they smoked marijuana, somebody had to carry it from one place to another in a pocket. So that this is a very widespread activity that is rarely getting involved in criminal activity of any sort whatsoever. Putting people into databases and building huge databases of people simply because they happen to live in the wrong neighborhood or happen to be the wrong skin color and the wrong gender and the wrong age is truly an unfair, I think reasonable to call it un-American kind of approach to things, and not a very good way of dealing with crime issues. So it is not fair. It is not effective in the crime fighting activity, and if anything, it probably makes it worse. And there was one study of this done by two University of Chicago Law School statisticians and researchers, who found that, if anything, this probably increases crime, largely because it diverts police from more serious crime-fighting activities. The other thing that it does, as I said, is it severely stigmatizes young people with an arrest record. And again, in the New York State Legislature, when the debates were held in the 1970s about decriminalizing marijuana, essentially about taking it out from under the umbrella of the state's notorious Rockefeller drug laws, one of the central motivators was you had a lot of middle-class white students who were being arrested at college campuses and various places around New York State, and the legislators and their families and so on were worried, and rightfully so, that this criminal record would stigmatize them, would limit their job possibilities and job opportunities. And part of the major motivation for the decriminalization of marijuana was about its terrible limiting effects on people's employment and professional and career advances. Well, that's still true today, even more so for the young blacks and Latinos who are stigmatized by having a marijuana arrest on their record, having a criminal record. And which then, if anything, limits what they can do, limits their schooling options, limits their job options, and therefore leaves, fewer and fewer options other than, for example, entering the sort of street corner drug business for much harder drugs.
Well, the report is A Marijuana Arrest Crusade, Racial Bias in Police Policy in New York City from 1997 to 2007, a very important study. We'll have the links again up on our website at stash.normal.org. I've been speaking with Dr. Harry Levine, who is a professor of sociology at Queens College in New York. And Dr. Levine, thanks for the study and thanks for all the information.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for downloading the NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. We are produced by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. Our executive producer is Alan St. Pierre. Our deputy director is Paul Armentano. Our webmaster is Brian Judy. And web production is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. As always, you can catch up on the latest information about marijuana at www.norml.org. And you can interact and download from our Audio Stash blog at stash.normal.org. For everyone here at NORML, I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville, hoping all your harvests are bountiful and your encounters with law enforcement are non-existent. We leave it today with a cannabis quote from George Carlin from his 1982 Playboy interview. When he was asked about his 30 years as a pothead, he said, quote, "Grass probably helped me as much as it hurt me, especially as a performer. When you're high, it's easy to kid yourself about how clever certain mediocre pieces of material are. But, on the other hand, pot opens windows and doors that you may not have been able to get through any other way. Being a very bound-up, Irish Catholic, tight-assholed person, I've often thought that whatever negative effects pot had on me, it probably saved me from being an alcoholic and a complete fucking brainless idiot by the time I was 25. So I'd say pot has been a break-even proposition for me." End quote. George, we'll all miss you, and I'm going to go right now and load up all of my George Carlin albums and recorded HBO specials and have my own little tribute tonight to George Carlin. Thanks for tuning in to the Daily Audio Stash, and until next time, take care of each other, tokers.